All right, let's start the show. My name is Andy King, and welcome to one of my last episodes of King's Comics for the year. I'm gonna be honest, it's winding down. I'm worn out. Y'all are worn out. Let's get through this together. Now, I'm still trying to get through my 2018 current collection of comics before the year ends. So let's get through this. Let's knock this out. Let's freaking go. We're going to start with a collector's edition of Death Note. I got this in a Reddit gift exchange. Once again, I already showed y'all I have several collected volumes of Death Note. It's one of my favorite manga series, and it's just got, I've watched the anime as well. I really enjoy the portrayal of a dark anti-hero who thinks he's doing the right thing. Once again, good manga. Recommend reading it it's got a different story if you've only watched the anime. Next up is another one of my favorite, from an emotional stance, graphic novels of all time, is Underwater Welder by Jeff Lemire. I've talked about Jeff Lemire before, one of my favorite writers. He writes seemingly every genre, horror, sci-fi, superhero of a comic, and Underwater Welder is no exception. It helped me kind of go through some rough passages of just emotional turmoil in my life when I was in college and interning. It's a very harrowing tale about what it means to be family and what it means to try your best despite maybe your past grievances or offenses. Another Jeff Lemire story is Trillium. I'll admit I didn't like this one too much. It's got a dual narrative of a man from the past and a woman from the future kind of finding each other and trying to work together on this kind of this cosmic mystery that's going on. It doesn't necessarily work as well as I thought. It was still an alright story, but I do enjoy Jeff Lemire's kind of abstract storytelling style as well as art, so I still have it just because he's one of my favorite authors. Next up is Tokyo Ghost. If this art style looks familiar, it's by Sean Gordon Murphy, who was the artist and writer of Batman and White Knight. The writer of this one is Rick Remender, another one of my favorite authors who writes a lot of dark, in this case, post-apocalyptic, or not even post-apocalyptic, just dystopian tales of an America where media reigns supreme. It's a bit of a, I don't want to say Blade Runner-esque, but, a little bit of 1904-ish-esque. If you've seen Idiocracy by Mike Judge, it's got that kind of tale, but with a lot more Mad Max-ish narrative and tone to it. People are addicted to drugs and technology. It's really just pedal to the metal, doesn't stop, and just also very dark about our reliance on drugs, technology, and instant gratification. Then we go into another Dark Horse comic, This Damned Band. This one's about a rock band that somewhat accidentally, facetiously makes a deal with the devil to become famous, except they do not realize that they did actually make a deal with the devil, and he's coming to collect. That's one of my favorite music-based comics, just not based on a real band, but just kind of referencing just the whole sex, drugs, rock and roll era of attacking music as well as just art in general. Then we get into Superman Red Sun. I've already done a brief review over this in my top 5 alternate Superman comics. Read it if you haven't. Once again, it's by Mark Miller, who was very instrumental in the MCU in writing a lot of the the original Civil War comic, as well as a lot of the Ultimate Universe when it was starting out. Then we go into Stray Bullets. This is a good kind of hit and miss series of stories by David Lapham. Actually, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. He's an author-artist who just writes a lot of interesting crime narratives going on from all angles of the fence, like from high schoolers to people who are just ducking low, trying to lay low from the law. It's got a lot of graphic content, so parents as well as younger viewers, please be careful or just about the content and what you might find. There's a lot of violence, there's a lot of sexual content as well, a lot of cursing. So this is a good one if you're into crime narratives, but at the same time, a lot of much more mature content. Then we go into Nighthawk. This was part of Marvel's Mack series that I started to allude to earlier. It's part of their Supreme Power universe, another alternate Marvel universe where they kind of take on different DC heroes and have their own different visions of DC heroes rather than rather than copying DC heroes, they do kind of I think the trope's called an XP, like an EXPY, an XP, which is when you take a version of a hero and or an archetype and spin it in your own sense. That's what they do with Nighthawk. He's this version of Batman. He's an African American black man. That's the same thing. He's an African American rich philanthropist living in Chicago who moonlights as a vigilante, but he is in essence a Batman who kills, is reckless, does what it takes to defeat and get rid of crime in his city. Then we have All-Star Superman, or Superman for All Seasons. All-Star Superman is by Grant Morrison. Superman for All Seasons is by Jeff Leb, as well as, Jeff Leb, the writer, and then Tim Sale, the author. This is another one of those quintessential or just very much a renowned and loved Superman tales of Superman just going through different seasons and phases of his life. Reflected through the 4 seasons of the year, but also just in kind of love, loss, just triumph, tragedy, a lot of different emotions, as well as just seasons of life, not just seasons that we typically think of. Now, then we get into 2 volumes I have of Spider-Gwen. Once again, she was, as you saw in Edge of the Spider-Verse, she's one of the most popular alternate Spider-Men to have come out. But then she was so popular, they came up with her own series. And Aaron Latour, the author of the series, Jason Latour, the original creator of the character, was writing her to begin with. So she was very popular, got her own series. She was, once again, in an alternate reality from the main Marvel continuity. So that is a huge deal, just in reading it, as well as if you were interested in the character from Into the Spider-Verse. Now we get into Southern Bastards. I've referenced this one before in talking about Jason Latour, in that Jason Aaron, as well as Jason Latour, the creator of Spider-Gwen, is the artist for this series rather than the writer. And Jason Aaron wrote this, and Jason Aaron wrote one of my favorite Thor runs that I think I alluded to or mentioned earlier in these series of videos. Either way, this is about football. It's just balls to the wall, Southern crime drama about football kind of ruling the South or ruling this small town, and just what they're willing to do to see their high school football team win. It's full of murder, chicken fried Southern murder. It's insane and very comedic in an incredibly dark sense. Then we go into Sheriff of Babylon. I actually have 2 copies of this. And apologies, y'all. I'm still playing around with the lighting, so if I'm moving this around, once again, it's kind of incidental. But Sheriff of Babylon. This one is kind of if you've seen the movie Sicario, it's kind of this Middle Eastern Sicario about this American military contractor who comes over to Baghdad to train Middle Eastern cops in military police and how to just have better conduct, as well as military policing standards and techniques. And then murders start to happen where he has to help investigate them while navigating the political and cultural, as well as racial boundaries and differences in this area as opposed to the American climate. It's a very intense, dense narrative. It's by Tom King, who's writing Batman right now, and as well as Mitch Gerads, a frequent collaborator he has. But Tom King is an ex-CIA agent, so that fuels a lot of his narratives when he writes things like Sheriff of Babylon. There are 2 volumes of it. I have read both and I own both, but I lent the second one to a friend of mine, Shane, and I'm trying to get it back, but I really want him to read it as well. I recommend the series like I do with most of the series I try to collect and own. Next we have Severed by Scott Snyder. If that name sounds familiar, he's the author of DC Metal, the run I am about to drop a review on, as well as of the Batman arc, the Batman series, prior to Tom King taking it over. In this tale, he writes this interesting mythology about a boy who has grown into an old man but reflects upon his childhood and encountering a monster, this interesting creature that had haunted him as a child when he had run away from home. It's very scary, dark. Scott Snyder loves writing horror-based narratives. He's currently writing the Justice League for DC right now, and he just has very dense, interwoven narratives with a lot of meaning, metaphor, literary elements, rhetorical elements, and that's not lost on Severed. Then we go into Scalped. This is one of my, not just one of my favorite series, or series I recommend, but one of my favorite series of all time. So Scalped is, while the name kind of seems off-putting, it is about Native American culture and just the culture, the caustic culture with the reservations and mentality. That's not to insult or kind of blur the line or be political. It's just something I've experienced and been told about, having been on mission trips with my church to the Navajo Nation, and having a background, at least I've been told that I'm part Native American. I'm going to Ancestry.com that at some point. But the main kind of narrative in this is just about this FBI agent returning to his reservation to uncover a lot of murder, drug dealings, a lot of criminal just elements going on the reservation he grew up and came from before going into the FBI and seeking to just escape that environment. It's got a lot of history tied to it, a lot of a social narrative, as well as just a scary amount of real world investigation and exposition going on as to why the reservation culture and why a lot of the history going into these Native American cultures is so dangerous, as well as why there is this cycle of just violence as well as destitution that's going on reservations and just in America as a whole. Then we get into Saga. This is one of the most famous, or I guess most prolific, most well-known sci-fi comics going on out there. It's by Brian K. Vaughan, who I've referenced a couple times already, who's written I think it was called Ex Machina. Yes, one of the series I've already mentioned in this video series. And Saga is this interesting kind of space, sci-fi supernatural romance spanning planets and just this incredible epic about these two lovers, Romeo and Juliet style, who have a child together, who are different races that are in continuous conflict with each other, and all of the cultural boundaries that are being breached by this, as well as it's just the kind of political tones it has for the rest of this interwoven world. It's very weird. Once again, it's sci-fi-esque, it's supernatural, it has supernatural elements. I mean, I'm talking ghosts and rocket ships made out of trees. It's very weird. But if you read it, it's got a lot of sexual content and violence once again, so be careful with the age range of reader going into it. But it is a fun series. It's just, it can seem a little mindless at times, but at the same time has a lot of deep, just emotional context, as well as just familial relationships, what it means to actually love and sacrifice, and a lot of deeper tones than just the overt sex and violence that you're going to see a lot of in this comic. And when I do mention tones like that, sex, violence, or graphic elements, that's not so much just to have shock value. That's to remind all the readers out there, or all the people who are trying to get into graphic novels, that there is going to be that content at times, and to maybe preface y'all with that if you have heard about a series and are wanting to check it out and then are a little bit off-put by the content. Not that you should be or shouldn't be, but more so that it's better to know going in than to have a bad experience with graphic novels or comics and then just be turned off of it altogether. That being said, let's keep it going. And now we get to go into the Scott Pilgrim series. And actually, I didn't know this was a comic series when I found it in high school. When I found it in high school, my brother, there are 6 volumes. I've got all 6 volumes of it. Well, that's just weird, because I've got 5 volumes in my hand, but I can't find them. We'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Either way, I've got all 6 volumes of it. There are 6 in total. It's by Brian Lee O'Malley, who's written Seconds as well as Lost at Sea, 2 series I also referenced earlier in this video series, and he's also writing Snot Girl for Image Comics right now. That's neither here nor there. But Scott Pilgrim is the basis for the movie that most people have seen, with Michael Cera as the titular role of Scott Pilgrim. It's this kind of burnout loser hero playing in a band in the Sex Bob-ombs in his hometown. A lot of video game references as well as odes to Canadian culture. Brian Lee O'Malley, the author, is Canadian and just loves his culture, his city, his country. That being said, that's once again neither here nor there. This is one of the first major comic series I got into. I only found out about it because my little brother Era, showed me a movie trailer on YouTube, and I thought this was awesome. So I started to Google it, found out it was based on a comic book series, and it's pretty actually ironic or coincidental that I can only find 5 volumes right now, because there's volume 6 on my desk. But it's funny that I could only find 5 volumes because when the movie was coming out, there were only 5 volumes out at the time. So it wasn't until right around when the movie was releasing that I was able to obtain the 6th volume and actually read it. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence that lined up. Really recommend it. Very funny. Very just, once again, deeper connotations and metaphors, emotional elements going on in the background that you don't expect. But once you peel back the layers of Scott's whole life, there's a lot more going on than what was referenced and mentioned in the movie. Both are fun. I recommend the movie and the comic book series, but definitely give the comic a shot if you have seen the movie. Then we go into this weird one called Sexcastle. I forget if I've gone over it already, but Sexcastle kind of lampoons and goes over parodies and satirizes a lot of Super Spy, as well as, I'm going to double check and make sure I haven't gone over this already, a lot of Super Spy, as well as just action movies. It tears them apart and even deconstructs them a little bit. There is a little bit of sexual content and violent content in there, but it's not too graphic, as weird as that's going to sound. But once again, that's for you to kind of discern. Despite the name Sexcastle, it's not as sex-fueled or as much mature content as you would think, but that is to remind everyone that there is still mature content in there, but not, no, I'm not going to talk too much about that. Just, once again, you want to investigate whatever works you're reading, especially for your kids or if you're a younger reader. Then we go into a weird one I found, which is a Japanese version of Dragon Ball. Once again, so in the not once again, but in the original Japanese Dragon Ball manga, it never became Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z was kind of a rebranding when it came to America, because you had Dragon Ball, the original series with Goku as a child coming to Earth, and then you had the Dragon Ball Z series, this kind of time gap from Goku being a child to him being an adult. But the thing is that in the original Japanese manga, this is volume, what is this? I think this is volume 17. I cannot read Japanese. I found this in a Goodwill for $1, and Goodwill, for those who don't know, is just a thrift shop in America. But if they don't have them overseas, I don't know. But I found this in a Goodwill for $1. And the interesting part about this is that it bridges the gap between Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball Z series. So that time gap between Goku being a child and then him being an adult, encountering his brother Raditz. But the thing is, once again, that this time gap, this change from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z was kind of titular, only in title for American anime conversion when they brought it overseas to kind of sell it and make it seem more edgy, I guess, to brand it more. But that being said, this is just a funny little comic. This is the only Dragon Ball manga comic that I have. I watched the series as a kid just on VHS and on Toonami when I could find it, so I thought I'd get this kind of in memorandum, if you will, to that. I didn't realize how many of these I was going to have, so I'm going to have to start going a lot faster. So then we have Rasputin. This one is a comic about, it's an alternate historical take on Grigory Rasputin, the famous kind of political manipulator in Russia who had a weird encounter of him being, like, people trying to assassinate him multiple times. This one has a more supernatural spin on the events of his life. This is volume 1 of, I think, 2. The artist Rossmo is Rossmo is one of my favorite artists, or I'm not going to say favorite, but an artist I always try to look out for. I just really love his style because it's very eerie, creepy, and horrifying at times. So I guess he is one of my favorite artists. That being said, this overall is an alright graphic novel. It's kind of fun at points, but the main thing I was investigating about this graphic novel is the art. I do very much love the art and the artist's style. And as a reminder, that is a thing I will frequently do or try to mention. I will, a lot of the times, I'll just buy graphic novels to either A, read them, and then I'll give them away, or if I got them from a library, I'll return them, or B, I'll buy them or see them because I just like the art style, or I like the writer. And if I like the writer or the art style enough, either one, I'll stick along for one of those two purposes. And honestly, a great thing is when the two align, but it's not just about, that's the beauty of graphic novels and comics that I love, is it's not just about the writer or the artist. It's like getting to see a movie in slow motion play before your eyes. And I'll go into this whole in another vlog or something, but that's why I love comics so much, is just this ability to explore different art styles, maybe even for the same story. I'll go into that with one of my series coming up, because now we have Zero. I think there's 4 volumes of it. I've mentioned this before, or I mentioned the writer at another time, who is Alice Codd. Alice Codd is an author who does a lot of postmodern work. I believe I mentioned one of his earlier works in the series, Material. Actually, Material came out at the same time or after he was writing Zero. Both are for Image Comics. Zero is the story of this secret agent named Zero. I forget his first name, but in a different light. He's part of this secret organization that mind controls him, has raised him since he was a kid to be this weapon of destruction. But then this postmodern, and I mean really postmodern, just metaphysical narrative of things going on besides him just being a spy trying to uncover mysteries. Because as things spiral out of control in this narrative, in this story, things get a lot more extreme than what's just going on Earth and our plane. I would say it gets it gets supernatural, but it gets more metaphysical, kind of going to the realm of dreams and human creation, human creativity and imagination. It's very, very strange. I have to admit, it's beyond me. I'd have to do a video essay or research this a lot more to peel back the layers behind it, but that's a common trend in Alice Cott's work. He has more going on under the surface than just the story you're seeing or the art. And the reason why I mention this and why I love it is not just the author, but because each issue of this comic, each one collected in these 4 volumes, is done by a different illustrator, by a different artist. 2 of them that I can remember off the top of my head are Jeff Lemire, the artist I mentioned already, as well as Tradd Moore, who was the artist on another series I mentioned, the Strange Talents of Luther Strode. 2 of my favorite, and the Ghost Rider comic, all new Ghost Rider with Robbie Rodriguez, that I have either mentioned or will have to mention. Once again, that's just how comics interrelate. That's how correlate. That's how they have different narratives and artists. It's why one of those reasons why I love them so much. Oh man, this one's this one's incredible. This one's X-Men, the worst X-Men ever. I say it because my buddy Riley, who I've mentioned, one of my best friends, Riley, who I've mentioned, got me into this band. Say Anything, this kind of punky band back in a punk band, alt rock band back in high school. And I'm 26, so it's been about a decade since he introduced me to him. But so the author, right? The kind of front man of that band, Max Bemis, loves comics and writes comics. I think I might have referenced this if I have already gone over a series called Polarity. If I have it, he wrote that as well. But he writes comics. He wrote a Moon Knight comic actually fairly recently, and he wrote this one, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, X-Men tale because of how dark and deconstructive it is. It's about a X-Man by the name of Bailey, an X-Man by the name of Bailey. I think Bailey Frazier. No, not Bailey. Either way, Bailey, who finds out his mutation is to blow up once. He can explode exactly once, and that's it. I say this in parallel to another mutant named Nitro, who is able to subatomically blow himself up and reassemble. But he blows up once, it's done. From there, Max Bemis kind of deconstructs how his life works. He satirizes a lot of his interactions with different X-Men, villains as well as heroes, kind of his relative worthlessness on the field. It's very, very kind of a haunting and really screwed up tale. It's not received well by a lot of people, but I loved it because of how much Max Bemis peels apart the layers of what's wrong with the X-Men narrative if you really want to tear it apart. Not that X-Men are bad. I love the X-Men. But at the same time, Max Bemis does a great job of tearing apart and reassessing a lot of common themes in the X-Men comics and superhero comics in general. Then we go on to Witches. This is a tale by... This is another horror story by Scott Snyder. The same one I mentioned has done Batman as well as Severed and other works. Either way, Witches is a horror story written for Image Comics by Scott Snyder as well as Jock. Jock is this artist who does a lot of interesting paint-based works, a lot of multi-layered art, but is also a movie concept designer as well as just a poster creator, graphic artist. He's done work for Mondo, this graphic design company in Austin, Texas, where I'm living right now, as well as a lot of storyboarding for movies like Ex Machina by, oh my gosh, Alex Garland. I forget the director off much, if that's not the director. Either way, Witches is this interesting story. There's always this kind of concept of magic. I think it's this law of magic, Moore's law, not Moore's law. This law of magic that magic is just any technology that we cannot understand. Any technology beyond what you can understand is magic. In this case, there's these ancient cove of witches, which is spelled with a Y, who are just far beyond, so technologically advanced beyond humankind that their technology appears as magic to us and is even organically based because of how, or would appear to us as organically based, or just dark and disgusting because of how far ahead of it is. They accept sacrifices. There's a lot of just horrifying elements to this story and a lot of dark twists and turns about the family that's being haunted by these witches in the small town they inhabit. Next we go into Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's Wolverine. This is an interesting one because Wolverine has a lot of ties to Japan, and that's exercised a lot, if not started. I need to double check the lore by this comic. This is by Chris Claremont, one of the most prolific X-Men writers of all time. He's written X-Men God Saves, Man Kills, and he's written a lot. And the reason why this is cool is because Frank Miller, another author artist, the one I mentioned, wrote and drew The Dark Knight Returns, is illustrating for this rather than writing on it, if not them both working on it together. It's about Wolverine's encounters in Japan, and I think his encounters as well as love with a woman I think named Mariko, and just his involvement trying to fight ninjas, or ninja, and realizing how ill-equipped he is to fight different opponents or opponents en masse. It's kind of an interesting learning experience for him because it's realizing how much he needs to grow and adapt as a warrior and how much has grown and adapted him in his experiences and travels. This is also interesting because I believe that in his romance and his love of Mariko, that's how his son Daken is born. Daken is the Dark Wolverine, his half-Japanese son who has 2 adamantium claws and really has it out for his dad. Then we go into a Winter Soldier run by, surprise, surprise, Rick Remender. This one was pretty alright. It's interesting because it just goes into a Rick Remender narrative that is, not a Rick Remender, but a Winter Soldier narrative that is more so about him temporarily regaining his memory and trying to just right wrongs as well as fight on the side of good, but then being recaptured and reprogrammed. So this is Winter Soldier, The Bitter March. It's just one season of his life where he's kind of snapped out of that in this episode where he comes back to his good side of nature that was as Bucky, but then gets pulled back into being this this weaponized human being. Then we go into Wild Children. This is also by Alice Cott and Riley Rossmo and a couple other creators, but this one you have to be. This one is a very edgy and dark work because it does deal with school violence and school shootings. I have it just as kind of a collection because I do like the author. He can be a little bit on the brash side of addressing social narratives as well as context. And while this is not one I would recommend for all readers, I do believe it is important for artistic freedom to be expressed. Not that I agree with the points of views and everything in this book, or that it even champions anything that I've mentioned, but more so that it does approach this very scary narrative of just the violence perpetuated in these cultures, as well as how the fear surrounding them does also perpetuate, if not even propagate, this behavior. Once again, I apologize for any of my views or anything I state that could be, if I haven't said it before, that could be taken out of context. I'm trying my best to explain and rationalize my love of comics, not just take political stances or anything on these. It's just more so that that's part of why I explore so many comics is because, and graphic novels, is because they explore a range of themes that are, once again, sometimes more sensitive than we care to associate with comics or funny pages or superheroes. And Wild Children is one of those novels, as well as some of those that I've mentioned either now or previously. Then next we come to The Wicked and the Divine. This is by Kieran Gillen and oh my gosh, now I'm forgetting names. Jamie McKelvey. So this team works on this interesting tale of just these gods who systematically come up in culture, like Amaterasu and Thor and, let's see, I think Anubis. Either way, just different gods from multiple different pantheons and religions, mythologies, who come up and become these celebrities in different cultures, American and global culture. And when I say celebrities, I mean they become DJs, they become pop stars, rock stars, they run nightclubs. It is weird. It is very weird. They give people sensations of euphoria. They have ragers. They have just, it's insane the amount of just culture they affect and how they persuade it. But then within 2 years, they all die and go away. So it's about exploring the, just the kind of cause and effect with, I guess, our culture celebritizing and heck, deifying, putting celebrities on pedestals, as well as how they kind of come into existence and then go away. But with this narrative of these gods being resurrected in modern day culture. Then We Three. This is by Grant Morrison as well, and I believe, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. And Frank Quitely, the artist, his name is a spin on Quite Frankly. But this team, Morrison and Quitely, work on this weird story about these 3 animals who have been experimented on and are still, despite their cyber organic bodies, they're still just a cat, a dog, and a rabbit, and they just want to be loved. Despite that, they've been weaponized by the military, as well as are just trying to find their place in the world, despite being these techno-organic monsters. And along this tale, it does have a happy ending. I'll spoil that because it just sounds so sad. But it is interesting, the kind of vision portrayed of what we consider to be, a monster, our interactions with animals, etc. I'm sure there's a lot more going on than I could understand or peel back, but the main reason why I like this one is because it's pretty cute, and my brother loves animals, and he loved this story, so I've just got an edition of it, because it's one of those common threads between me and my brother. Then, We Can Never Go Home. Man, this lighting thing, I'm going to get it sorted out. But We Can Never Go Home. This is another one of those kind of superhero deconstruction stories about this boy and this girl who run away from home after discovering that this girl has superpowers, seemingly out of nowhere. From then, they're on the road just trying to evade secret organizations and the police, but it also kind of peels back the layers of who's actually hunting them. Are they actually in danger of anything? Is this something that is kind of a self-feeding beast? They put themselves in this situation, but also tearing it back, kind of deconstructing the idea of these superhero runaways, as well as this whole boy and this girl romance. I mean, just a lot of generic things we associate with these superhero and young adult genres. It's also by this relatively no, this relatively unknown studio, Black Mask Studios, has done a couple works that I like. I believe they've done We Can Never Go Home, Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, about some kids trying to pull a bank heist, as well as I think they also did Tomboy, which I've mentioned before, and is a spin, kind of an American spin on the whole Maho Shoujo, which is, magical girl genre, which that's Tomboy is really interesting, and Maho Shoujo is like Sailor Moon, things like that. Yep. We're getting it done, folks. Next is another copy of Watchmen. This is actually my original copy of Watchmen that I owned. I just bought a hardcover copy just because I love the book so much. And this was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, graphic novel that I ever bought. I mean, this copy right here that I ever bought and read as a high schooler. I bought this one, and my brother bought a Civil War. So both of those, it's funny because of how dark both of those stories are. But yeah, we both read them, we loved them, and that really shaped just my love of graphic novels and my pursuit of the genre, because they were both very narrative dense. They weren't just Calvin and Hobbes like what I would read as a kid. They showed me what you could do. It's not just a cartoon. It's a book. And I mean, heck, this is one of Time Magazine's 100 novels of all time. The author artist team is Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. There we go. But Zack Snyder, same guy who did the Justice League and Justice League, Man of Steel, etc., is the one who adapted this to screen. And Scott Snyder actually has a history of adapting several comic book movies, which is 300 was based on a graphic novel by Frank Miller. That being said, this is another incredible deconstructive work of the superhero genre. I've mentioned it before with my previous one of my previous collection videos. So let's keep it going. Then we get into, I'm just going to show you a couple of them, but Scott Snyder's Batman run. It's an incredible Batman run. It's one of my favorites. I enjoy it just because it's a lot more horrifying. Like I've mentioned, Greg Capullo, this is the same team that did Dark Knight's Metal, a DC Metal event. This leads up to it, and yeah, they do an incredible job here. Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, or Greg Capullo, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, I have to admit, but Greg Capullo, they both capture the sense of horror to the Batman mythos as well as with these villains they're facing. I mean, especially the Joker, and create this new terrifying villain, the Court of Owls. So I've got 8 volumes out of 10 of this run. I'm still trying to collect the last 2. It's just more money than I want to spend right now, which is ironic considering that I just did a December haul. Coming up, we've got Daredevil End of Days. I've been wanting to do a recommendation and a review of this video, but it's a harrowing tale of Daredevil dying. Yep, spoiler, but it's an alternate reality where Daredevil dies, and Daredevil's kind of flown off the hinge. He dies in a street fight with Bullseye, who just beats him to death, and then, beats him to within an inch of his life, then takes one of his batons and stabs it through his head. So yeah, right off the bat, very violent, very dark, very mature. And from there, it becomes this investigative tale, this kind of noir, this story of this reporter trying to find out, I forget if it's Ben Urich or not, but it's this reporter trying to discover what is going on, what happened with the last of Daredevil's days, and leading up to this, you find out he spurned a lot of his relationships with different heroes and different, like Black Widow, Spider-Man, the Avengers, as well as the fact that he really started to get, like, once again, flew off the hinge. Case in point, he kills the Kingpin at one point, and it shows his kind of desperation in his actions to rid New York of crime. Yeah, speaking of Daredevil. Then we go into Mark Waid's Daredevil run. This is one of my, I keep talking about my favorites, but this is one of my favorite Daredevil runs, and another one that got me into reading, trying to read entire runs of comics, actually. It's, let's see, 1, 2, 3. It's 7 volumes in total. This is the first part of the run. It's while Daredevil is in New York, before going to California to escape. It's a common trend in Daredevil comics is that people typically know that Daredevil is Matt Murdock, or might not be able to prove it. I've mentioned this before, but in this comic, he ends up, you know what? I'm sorry. That's one of those things where I don't want to reveal too much about how this comic ends. It's one of my favorite Daredevil runs, one of my favorite series of Daredevil comics. It made me love the character before the Netflix TV series came out. That's what invested me in the Netflix TV series, and it's by one of my legitimate favorite artists of all time, Paulo Rivera, who I mentioned worked on Marvel Mythos because he does these beautiful Spanish-inspired painting, like portraits of different different heroes and genres with anything he works on. But yes, Daredevil by Mark Waid, highly recommend it, and it's just a beautiful introduction to Daredevil as a character. Then we go into Batwoman Hydrology. I have not finished this Batwoman run. It's by J.H. Williams and W.H. Hayden Blackman. I need to reread this. It's an interesting, just kind of horrifying vision of a Batwoman in Gotham, how she operates, a little bit, in some senses, more brutal than Batman even, but also just, I got it, I think, because the art was just beautiful. So I definitely need to read it again and soak in the narrative a little bit more. But it's part of the New 52 run, and a lot of the Batwoman I need to read is actually, I've been told, the Greg Rucka Batman. So I'm trying to go through, Batwoman I need to read is the Greg Rucka Batwoman. So based on what I've read, I would recommend anything by Greg Rucka, Batwoman or Wonder Woman, to try to read that. But that being said, I'm going to give this a reread. Hopefully I can recommend it or even complete the New 52 run of it and give my recommendation of it within the next year. Okay, this is the last bit before I have to. Holy crap! There's so much more. Sorry, y'all. I'm trying. All right, then we go to Tropic of the Sea by Satoshi Kon. So Satoshi Kon is a pretty famous mangaka as well as anime director. He's directed works such as Paprika, Deep Blue, like Perfect Blue rather, and Millennium Actress. The interesting note about this is Paprika allegedly inspired Inception by Christopher Nolan, the movie, and let's see, Perfect Blue allegedly inspired Darren Aronofsky for his for Black Swan. That being said, in Tropic of the Sea, we see this interesting tale about this town. I keep saying interesting tale. We see this story, this fable of this modern day town and just kind of gentrification going on with it, as well as some families trying to adhere to the legacy as well as mythologies, the culture of the town, and some of them, a lot more of them, selling out for the sake of just making a quick dollar. But you find out that this boy's family, the one on the cover, is the kind of this protector of this mythology, this mermaid egg, as well as whether this myth is real or not, and the implications of protecting it and maintaining this lore and this culture. Then we go into the all-new Ghost Rider run. This is an fantastic introduction to a different vision of Ghost Rider. There's multiple Ghost Riders. The original is Johnny Blaze, and you've got, I think, Danny Ketch, and then another one, my favorite one, honestly, is Robbie Rodriguez. So he's this boy in California, he's a Hispanic boy having to live on his own and take care of his special needs brother, but just by repairing cars, working in an auto shop, as well as when he has the time, taking out cars and racing them. It's kind of got a little bit of that drive feel in the beginning, but he's a high school student, getting picked on and beat up. The artist is Tradd Moore, one of my favorites once again, and I really resonated with it because of the fact that Robbie's just this kid trying to take care of his little brother. They were abandoned by his parents, or they passed away. Somehow he's having to look out for his little brother. And once again, his little brother's special needs is in a wheelchair, so he's having to take care of and facilitate everything that he can do, and he just loves him. And so there's a lot going on, especially as 2018 and the current era is about just representation and things like that. Heroes like Robbie Rodriguez are more than about representation or whatever kind of vision of heroes that you would like to see, but also just about this is going to sound cliche, but about like what a hero should be outside of having superpowers or being Ghost Rider. It's about him just being a good human being and being so full of love that he is beyond this kind of demonic being empowering him. Then we go to Doctor Strange, the Oath. Let's see. Wait a minute. Guys, I'd like to apologize. I think I've already gone over these comics. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video. I'm going to stop this collection video. I think I've gone over a few of these already. I need to do a recount. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of King's Comics. I think we got one more video, one more collection video, and we should be good for 2018. But I got a few more that I'm trying to wrap up and edit, not just collection videos, before the year closes out. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm going to do a recount on comics, double check, and we'll go over and finish strong soon. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and please join us for another episode of King's Comics.